With the latest agriculture news from across the state and nation, it's time for the AgNet News Hour from AgNet West. Here's your host, Sabrina Halvorson.
Good morning. Thanks for joining us on this Friday morning for the AgNet News Hour. I'm Sabrina Halvorson here with Lorrie Boyer.
Good morning.
Today we are starting off talking about the Farm Act. And so what this is the Foreign Adversary Risk Management Act, Farm Act. And it was just reintroduced by Senators Tommy Tuberville of Alabama and John Fetterman of Pennsylvania. So that's a Republican and a Democrat. This is a bipartisan bill. As I said, it's reintroduced. We also had this in the last session, but it didn't make it all the way through. And essentially, this does a few things. But the biggest thing that this bill does is it works on an issue that we've talked about a few times, Lorrie, and the foreign ownership of U.S. ag land. And so what they're trying to do with this bill is to not just prevent more foreign ownership of U.S. ag land, but more so take a closer look at it, especially before it happens. And so there are some interesting points to that and some interesting thoughts on should foreign, in many cases, our foreign adversaries own ag land here in the U.S. And like I said, it's something that we've talked about a few times.
Yeah, and what they're really pushing for in here and kind of being vocal about is, it's obvious though, but I mean, there's a lot more to it, but it's food security. Food security being a national security and making sure that the foreign ownership of land in the United States does not compromise that. And like you said, we have talked about it. Issue is coming up several times over the last year and a half or so, but really in the last 6 months, I would say more and more than ever before. And now, you think about this, and I think about land primarily when I think about it. But according to a statement from the senators in introducing this or reintroducing it, as you mentioned, it's also applicable to the chain, to the processing chain and packaging chain, and even the shipping side of it. I think those are things that maybe I haven't talked about as much and maybe don't think about as much when I think about foreign ownership of ag land in the U.S.
And that's an interesting point too. And what I think of is a few times this has come up, and I've spoken with a couple of senators from North Dakota because there was a big issue last year, may have been 2023, in North Dakota where a Chinese company was buying ag land near an Air Force base. And this became national news because not only were we talking about like U.S. food security, but now we were talking about national security as well because of having a Chinese company so close to the Air Force base. And and honestly, that was an issue that it took me quite a while to understand because we deal so much with in the news, we hear so many different viewpoints about all of our subjects, but this too, should any company outside of the US own our ag land? And it brings to mind so many points, as we said, food security, but also the idea that we're now giving them a space in the country that could be close to some of our military installations. That causes additional problems. And so there was a few ways that this issue has been looked at. Now, with the Farm Act, one of the other things that it does is it adds the Secretary of Agriculture as a permanent member of the Committee on Foreign Investments in the United States. So that's a committee that already exists. There are other cabinet members on there. And basically, this committee works with this issue, not necessarily ag land specifically, but how much should other countries invest in properties or businesses or whatever in the United States. To me, it really makes sense to have the Secretary of Agriculture on that committee.
It does, and I'm with you. It's something that probably hasn't really been thought about as much in the past, but now that we're seeing more and more, I mean, we hear and have heard for several years about foreign ownership of our ports, and even in Colorado, some of our highways and tolls and things like that. You kind of hear about that off and on throughout the years. but it's been more prevalent in the ag land. And as you mentioned, North Dakota being near a military site, I think that has also happened in a handful of other states as well, where this has become a top priority issue and is being more and more looked at because of the proximity and what that means for safety and what that means for our military activities and knowledge. And we already know that there's a lot of questioning going on with drones and the balloons and things like that. So it only adds to some of that concern, I think. But also, it also makes me think too about private property rights. So if you are a farmer and you own land, whether it be by a military or a military site or not, like how much does that play into this? How much should we be looking at private property rights? And, that's still something that we have to preserve in this country.
That's an excellent point. And how much, as we've talked about before too, when we change some laws, how much are we affecting other laws or giving, open space to other laws that making it easier to infringe on some of our rights and things that have historically been protected? When we start changing some of these things, are we making it easier for the government to come in and do things like that? So that's a very interesting point to look at. How far is too far?
Exactly. And if I'm, like I said, if I'm a farmer and maybe I want to retire or move or reinvest the money that I would make off that land in something else on my farm, I should have the right to sell no matter to who it is. It's about the money and who's going to offer the most value for my land. And so I think that we have to somehow retain that. But I also see the larger macro picture that this bill is addressing. So this really is a hard discussion, actually. What I don't know, in all cases, is it private property or is the property owned by like a farmer, a family farm, or is it corporate? Does that even matter? It's just about private property, right?
Right, right. We're going to continue talking about this. We do need to take a quick break. But when we come back, we'll continue on this topic. This is the AgNet News Hour. I'm Sabrina Halvorson. She's Lorrie Boyer. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the AgNet News Hour. We are talking about the reintroduction of the Farm Act, which is the Foreign Adversary Risk Management Act. And so this would do quite a few things. And, just before the break, you brought up a great point about how much would this restrict our farmers who want to sell their land? And the possible buyer is perhaps a Chinese-owned corporation. Would our farmers then not be able to sell their land? And what kind of a bind could that put them in?
Now, the two that introduced this, and I know others signed on, and as you mentioned, it was a bipartisan. Again, it is U.S. Senator Tommy Tuberville from Alabama and Senator John Fetterman from Pennsylvania that have reintroduced it. I would say this, though, the timing is right, I would think, especially with the new administration coming in and with Trump's discussion points and his stance on not doing so much business with other countries. And I'm saying that pretty general because, as you and I've talked about here recently, there's a lot going on with regard to this and how he feels about other countries and how they interact with the United States and how we interact with them for that point. But it is good timing, I think. I would imagine as we continue to see this bill move or continue to at least see this bill discussed, and just guessing that the Trump administration would support something like this.
I would guess as well that it would get support from the administration. Again, the Trump administration has not actually made issued a statement on this or given a position, but I think that you're right in reading the situation how you are, that this again would be something that with controlling again foreign, involvement in the U.S., I think is a big part of the Trump administration's goals. Another thing that this act, that the Farm Act would do, is says, protecting U.S. agriculture from foreign control through mergers and acquisitions too. So, and through mergers is a part that I want to really focus on that. Well, I guess acquisitions too. But so if a Chinese company, let's say, buys a U.S. company that has ag land here. So it buys a U.S. ag company or a part of a U.S. ag company. This would also stop that as well. So there could be some big implications there for some larger companies as well. And the reason I use China as an example is because China does own, or a lot of agricultural companies, I should say, are Chinese owned. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't have that right in front of me, but I actually saw a number at one point here not too long ago. I believe that they are the largest foreign ownership, both in terms of ag companies and ag land. And I hope
Right.
I'm right on that. We can fact
I
check
believe
that
you are.
later, but I believe I saw that number on that. So,
Hmm.
yeah.
Yeah, and I think also one of the things that you're referencing is the largest owner of U.S., not ag land total, but the largest foreign owner, right?
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
So, and in China, not necessarily our friend. So I can see why this is something that our lawmakers are saying we really need to take a very close look at.
According to, this isn't exactly what I was referring to, but according to USDA data from December of 2023, foreign investors own approximately 45 million acres of U.S. agricultural land. And that is big. That's a lot
That
of land
is.
if you think about that.
That is what?
That is so much land if you think about that
It is.
number.
Yeah, it is. And I mean, it's almost alarming when we think about it in that perspective, how much the percentage of American ag land that is not owned by American owners or companies.
So what should we be more concerned about? Foreign ownership of ag land, or the fact that most of our ag land is now being developed and put under concrete and asphalt? Because that's happening at an alarming rate as well. I don't know which is worse.
I agree. I don't know which is worse either. I think, though, that together they're both leading to a problem that we talk about indirectly, but the fact that we are losing more farms around the nation. We're growing less because we have less ag land, just total. And so that's an issue that, we're going to need to remedy.
Yes. And I think it is actually out there and being addressed. How you stop this whole thing, I don't know. But kind of going back to the premise of this bill, adding the USDA secretary into the mix, into the committee and the decision making on that, but also the food chain side of it, not just owning the land, but owning the product, deciding where the product goes, who it goes to, how it gets there, all those things. And if we don't keep an eye on this, it could get out of, and maybe it already is, but it could get out of hand very quickly. And then what does that mean to us as consumers, to our food security, as we talked about? And I've talked about ag labor a lot. I mean, then that all works into this whole equation.
Right. There's a lot of sides to this coin. And again, the whole idea of protecting U.S. ag land, I think, is at the base of this act. We'll be learning a lot more about it as the weeks continue, but for now, that's what it is. It was just reintroduced, so no action has been taken on it yet. We'll continue to watch and see how it goes. We do need to take a quick break. Lorrie's back right after the break. This is the AgNet News Hour. I'm Sabrina Halvorson. She's Lorrie Boyer. We'll be right back.
Welcome back to the AgNet News Hour. Here's Lorrie Boyer.
My guest on the show here today is Dr. David Magana. He is a senior analyst with Rabobank, and today we will be talking about potatoes. He recently took part in the National Potato Expo, which was held in Orlando. David will be talking about some of the things that you picked up from that expo, but talk to me in general about the U.S. potato market and potato industry.
Yeah. I will focus on the fresh potato market in the U.S. Over the past few years, significant changes in the industry. If we start with the 21 and the 22 crop, those were unusually low because of the drought, very expensive inputs. So the 2022 U.S. crop was the lowest on record. Historically high prices, but then the production rebounded in 23 and prices went down, putting significant pressures on margin, even below break even in the spot market for some varieties. And in 24, production was similar to that of 23, and prices have not recovered. So for 25, probably good news for consumers because we will have steady supplies of potatoes, and we should expect prices to be similar to those that we observe in 20.
What about exports?
Well, in exports, over the past couple of years, we've seen also significant changes. Historically, Canada has been the destination for the majority of U.S. fresh potato exports. But since 2022, Mexico opened the whole Mexican market for U.S. fresh potatoes. So now, starting in 2024, Mexico became the largest destination for U.S. potatoes in the fresh market. Now, going forward, that could be potentially impacted by the likely implementation of tariffs. And if the past is a good predictor of the future, we saw that in 2018, when the U.S. imposed some tariffs, then the trading partners, they retaliated, targeting U.S. ag industries. And in this case, if the U.S. imposes some tariffs on Mexico, it is likely that they will be retaliating, and probably they will be imposing tariffs on some key industries, potentially including apples, dairy, corn, or even potatoes. So that is not going to help with the need that the industry is needing to be exporting more potatoes to have a more balanced supply-demand situation.
What are some things that are coming up as far as research and development that you're monitoring in the industry?
In the industry, we see, in terms of varieties, some specific segments of the fresh potato industry have been growing, particularly Jello potatoes. Over the past decade, the production of Jello potatoes in the U.S. has almost doubled and is one of the most dynamic segments. Also, other more like specialty potato varieties continue to increase the share. And one aspect, over the past 5 years, if we consider 2019 as a baseline and now 24 in comparison, we see that for the market, food service share is been declining from 58% share of food service as destination for U.S. potatoes in 2019, that going back to 53% in 24. On the other hand, if you see the retail share, that has been increasing from 42% in 2019 to about 47% in 2024. So we continue to see this shift from the food service channel to the retail channel. And on retail, total sales have increased on a total 10%. You compare 24 versus 2019. Seems like that has been an attractive segment. Potatoes continue to be an affordable option for consumers. And in general, in 2024, we saw that the fresh produce aisle in general has become a healthy alternative for U.S. consumers, not only from the nutrition standpoint, but also from the budget point of view, given that consumer price index in this segment of the supermarket has been flat. And in some cases, we've seen negative variation year on year. So basically, 24 prices were similar to those of 23 at the retail level. And for 25, as I mentioned before, we should expect probably similar prices, at least in the potato segment.
Dr. David Magana is my guest here today, Senior Analyst with Rabobank. We'll continue the show right after this. You're listening to AgNet West. I'm Lorrie Boyer. Welcome back here to AgNet West. I'm Lorrie Boyer. Dr. David Magana is my guest as we pick up our conversation here today. He is a Rabobank Senior Analyst, and today we are talking about the U.S. potato industry. That being said, what about imports? Is the U.S. a big importer when it comes to potatoes, Dr. Magana?
Yeah, about 10 to 15% of the potatoes that are consumed in the U.S. are imported, mostly from Canada. And here, again, you have some dynamics in terms of increasing availability of Jello potatoes coming from Canada. That's the big portion of the U.S. imports coming from Canada. And the U.S. exports, as I mentioned, we just had this transition of Mexico surpassing Canada as the main destination for U.S. fresh potatoes.
What else did you learn or pick up while you were at that expo?
Well, obviously, with what has been happening in terms of production cost and prices, more growers continue to invest in sustainability efforts and also in regenerative practices. So that's what is on the producer control. Try to be more efficient, try to be more sustainable, and reduce cost as much as possible, given the current conditions where spot prices for some segments of potatoes, for some varieties, are close to break even. In some cases, are below break even for some cases. As many producers obviously are price takers, you cannot do much about the price level, but what you can control is try to focus on reducing cost, and that is what the industry is trying to do, achieve more efficiencies. And these efforts towards sustainability, some growers have really been putting efforts in that sense.
What are your expectations for 2025 fresh potato prices and economics for growers?
The industry expectation is that probably acreage is going to be marginally declining in 25 versus 24, given these not very attractive prices. But if you compare some rotation crops, those namely corn, soybeans, wheat, we've seen bigger pressure on prices recently for those rotation crops. So seems like we will not see a lot of changes in acreage, and depending on weather, then we will see how the yields are going to be in 25. But as of the first half of 25, at least from the consumer's point of view, we will have a steady supplies of potatoes at similar prices as those that we observed in 24. So good supplies and good option for consumers.
Anything else? Now I'll ask you that. Anything else I missed asking you?
No. I think investments to be more efficient, that will continue to be a relevant point as we move forward. And obviously in 2025, there are a lot of moving pieces from the macroeconomic standpoint, particularly if the new administration in the U.S. is going to impose tariffs or other actions that may be inflationary. We may see interest rates to be higher for longer, and inflation may be picking up in 25 and going forward into 26. So with all the consequences related to that, in the production cost point of view, and also in interest rates that are likely to stay higher for longer.
Thank you to my guest for the first part of the show here today, Dr. David Magana, Rabobank Senior Analyst. On the second part of the show here today, Farm News reporter Todd Gleason has an interview on Ukraine's relevance in the world export markets. He visits with Joanna Calusi with the University of Illinois.
Since the beginning of the war with Russia, Calusi says Ukraine's economy has been hit hard. Its GDP is still 22% below 2021 levels, and she thinks the recovery to pre-war levels could take up to 5 years, even if the war ended today. Now, before the conflict, Ukraine was a major player in global agriculture, exporting grains like corn, wheat, and vegetable oil to countries across Europe, Asia, and Africa. This year, its grain and oilseed production is expected to drop 74 million metric tons. That's 10% lower than the last season, says Calusi.
Ukraine has lost nearly half of its wheat production, primarily due to a decline in acres harvested rather than yields. A significant increase in wheat yields during the last two crop seasons has partially offset the sharp reduction in harvested area compared to the pre-war levels. Corn production has also been affected, though not as badly as wheat.
Calusi says the number of corn acres harvested has dropped, but the impact is less dramatic than that for wheat. This is because corn is produced widely across the country, with acreage in both central and northern parts of Ukraine, while wheat is heavily concentrated in areas closer to the conflict zones in the east and the south. The geographic proximity to the war has taken a greater toll than on wheat production in Ukraine, while at the same time, Colucci says, farmers have been adjusting to world market signals.
Like prices and export opportunities, which has helped maintain some stability. Still, lower yields and reduced acreage have kept overall corn production about 20% below pre-war levels.
Ukraine, despite the production issues, has enough corn and wheat to meet its domestic demand. This, in part, is because of the shrinking population and a lack of livestock in the country. That lack of livestock, by the way, is both a short and long-term issue. It's also one Ukrainians dealt with after the fall of the Soviet Union. People ate the cows and pigs without regard then for breeding stock. Rebuilding herds can be a years-long process. It's also probably one of the reasons why Ukraine has been able to meet its wheat and corn export demand currently, though corn exports fell by some 6.6 million metric tons in 2024.
But there is a bright spot here. Grain shipments via seaports now make up 80% of all shipments, the highest level since the war started. This shows that Ukraine's export logistics are holding up even in challenging circumstances.
So despite significant challenges, damage to its infrastructure, lost farmland, and reduced production, Ukraine's efforts to improve and secure its export logistics and to target those improvements to gain market share in Western Europe, well, they've worked. This, says Illinois' Joanna Colucci, has allowed Ukraine to remain a player in the global corn and wheat markets. For a deeper look into this topic, check out Colucci's full article on the Farm Doc Daily website. It's at farmdocdaily.illinois.edu.
Thank you to Todd Gleason for that report here on the show today. I'm Lorrie Boyer for AgNet West. Stay tuned for Sabrina Halvorson.
Welcome back to the AgNet News Hour. Here's Sabrina Halvorson.
This segment is brought to you by UPL. We're talking today with Cassie Reeser. She is a technical service manager for UPL. So start off with, Cassie, tell our listeners what early season diseases almond growers should be watching for.
Yeah, so bloom time diseases for almonds, early season diseases are throughout the state, and those diseases range from anthracnose, bacterial spot, brown rot, jacket rot, leaf blight, scab, and shot hole. So a decent sized list for diseases to watch out for.
So with there being that decent sized list, like you said, several things that they need to watch for, what's the best thing that they could be doing?
So being proactive and kind of knowing your orchard and knowing what diseases you're at high risk for, and kind of knowing what products to use and the mode of action work best for those diseases. So for UPL, we are really excited to be able to offer growers a new mode of action, which is a FRAC Group 52 almond fungicide, and that is called Axios. So it is a brand new preventative and systemic activity mode of action fungicide, and it is an excellent fungicide that can help control that brown rot, monolinea, scab, and shot hole, as well as anthracnose. So it has most of those bloom time diseases covered.
And you mentioned that the best thing that they can do is know their orchard, which, of course, a lot of, almond growers, farmers in general, they know their orchards. But what would you suggest would be good ways to make sure they know what they're dealing with there?
Just making sure that they get out into the field, or at least have a PCA go out into their field, especially with this springtime rain that we're getting. Kind of going out, monitoring when their trees are starting to get ready to open up for bloom. Look for that pink bud, look for that bud swell on those leaves, so they know about when they need to be preparing their spray equipment, and they can prepare all the chemicals and personnel needed to get out and apply kind of their first spray for the season.
And you talked about the new product Axios. What are some of the things that you think really make that stand out?
So the great thing about Axios, like I mentioned before, it is a brand new mode of action, which means it has its own brand new FRAC group. So that's FRAC Group 52. So this is a mode of action that previously did not exist. So what that means for growers is that, they've been using other FRAC groups for a long time, like 7, 9s, 11s, and 3s. So there's been some resistance popping up for a lot of those bloom time diseases. So having a new mode of action for these growers to be able to mix in their tanks really is a great tool for them. It helps with resistance management and ultimately really helps to control diseases like that bunch of bloom time diseases that we talked about.
And you did a good job explaining it, but let's really highlight how important it is to have that new frac group. Especially when growers have been dealing with certain diseases over and over and over again, to have this new tool, completely new frac group, kind of is a game changer.
It really is. And, it takes a long time for, discovery companies to be able to bring a new active ingredient to the marketplace. So that means that not only was it a new active ingredient that was discovered, but it went through all of the, resistance and, what's the word I'm looking for? Residue testing to be able to, be brought to the market. And that series of events kind of takes up to 12 years. So the fact that we're actually able to bring a new frac group to the market takes a long time, and it's the result of a lot of years of work and research. And I did mention residue testing and this frac group. A lot of questions we get with a new product is, let's talk about export markets and residues, and those MRLs, those maximum residue levels, have been established both in nationwide and internationally.
And that is a great point to bring up too. I like that you brought that up because it is something that our growers need to take into consideration. So the fact that that has already been considered and worked out is also very helpful.
Yeah, and it's another product to put in the tank. It helps kind of shoulder the burden of disease control. It doesn't have any cross resistance with any of the existing frac groups out there, and it's highly compatible in your tank as well. So very user friendly, environmentally friendly, and tank mix friendly.
All right. Is there anything else that we should be talking about or anything we've left out?
One thing I will mention, I did for Axios, its mode of action I said was preventative and systemic. So that means, especially for bloom time, you're going to have that protection up to 26 days. So decent residual of that new tissue. It also has protection and control of alternaria. So you can kind of get a jump on some of those summertime diseases as well. You don't have that bloom plus 2-week restriction with Axios. So it is really flexible for growers to use depending on their disease pressure in their field. So that's another thing we'd like to mention, is that flexibility with this new AI. And that new AI is called Kenoprol.
Perfect. So for our listeners who are taking all this in as they're listening, what's the best way for them to get more information?
To contact their UPL sales rep, reach out to them. You can reach out to me. And then we also have a link on for our website, which is upl-ltd.com/US.
This is the AgNet News Hour. I'm Sabrina Halvorson. We'll be back in just a moment. Welcome back to the AgNet News Hour. President Trump's pick for Agriculture Secretary, Brooke Rollins, had her nomination hearing with the Senate Agriculture Committee on Thursday. The hearing was a total of 4 hours long. During that hearing, Senator Dick Durbin of Illinois asked her about the mass deportations planned by the president and his administration. Here is that exchange.
The mass deportation of undocumented people from the United States. I mentioned to you that I have been surprised by the response I received among farmers and ranchers and people involved in agriculture when it comes to the immigration issue. I told you about the dairy farmer who said, Senator Durbin, we're going to close down our dairy operation after 3 generations in our family because we need immigrant workers for dairy operations in Illinois. Another young lady with the Farm Bureau raised her hand and said, while you're at it, include the orchards. Who's going to pick this crop? It isn't the local kids at the high school. They won't even man the fruit stand out by the highway, and I put an air conditioner in there. I can't get them to come to work for me. I need immigrant workers. Turns out that 40% of the farm workers in this country are undocumented. And you know what that means. They're vulnerable to being deported. And if they're deported, what are the farmers going to do? For a lot of them and for a lot of different industries, immigration is critical. Now, your organization has said some pretty strong things your American First Policy Institute. They've called for deportation at a scale that actually matters and massive deportation efforts. So I just need to ask you, what is your policy on immigration? We've got to get down to the real world, not the criminals. We don't want them. They shouldn't come here and they shouldn't stay. But those who work every single darn day to pick a crop that American people are not going to pick themselves, and most of them, 40%, I shouldn't say most, 40% are undocumented. So can we expect this administration to be raiding farms and going after the immigrant farm workers?
Senator, thank you. And I really was grateful for our time yesterday and our time working together in the last administration. And I appreciate your kindness. I was a little late yesterday. There was some confusion and you gave me a little grace. So I really appreciate that. Yes, Senator Lujan, you as well. Listen, the president's vision of a secure border and a mass deportation at a scale that matters is something I support. I was his domestic policy director in the last White House. I have built and led an organization alongside Chad Wolf, our former Secretary of Homeland Security, at the America First Policy Institute. I want to be extremely transparent, and I think that you deserve that. That is my commitment, is to help President Trump deploy his agenda in an effective way, while at the same time defending, as if confirmed, Secretary of Agriculture, our farmers and ranchers across this country. And so having both of those, which you may argue is in conflict, but having both of those as key priorities, my job is to work with, if confirmed, the Secretary of Labor, Lorrie Chavez-DeRimmer from Oregon, but she herself has family farms in California and Oregon, to work with her on the H-2A program, to also work with all of you to reform and perhaps modernize that H-2A program. We'll also say that the president has been very clear that this first round will be aimed at, as you mentioned, those who have committed crimes and are criminals while inside our borders over the last 4 years. So we will follow the data. We will follow and listen to our farmers and ranchers as this is moving. And my commitment is to work with all of you to work to solve and do everything we can to make sure that none of these farms or dairy producers are put out of business.
Now, I support your answer. Dangerous people shouldn't be here, and if they're here, they should be gone, period. But when we're talking massive deportation, we're gone beyond dangerous criminals. And I just wonder if we ought to give fair warning to farmers and ranchers across America that if you have immigrant labor, you can expect federal agents to come and search your property. Is that in the future for farmers and ranchers under the mass deportation plan?
Sir, I have not been involved in that. The president's current plan, I cannot answer that one way or the other. I do know that my job is to ensure that as those conversations are ongoing, if confirmed, that I am part of that data collection and understanding, and that the president understands that what this means to our agriculture community. And I believe sincerely that he will execute his agenda that he has promised the American people, but that we'll never forget our ag community in so doing.
We'll have more as Rollins continues through the confirmation process in coming days. That's our show for today. This is the AgNet News Hour. I'm Sabrina Halvorson. On behalf of Lorrie Boyer and myself, thank you for sharing your morning with us.
To get more information on the topics you heard today, visit AgNet West at agnetwest.com. You can also stay connected by following us on our social media at AgNet West on Facebook, Instagram, and X. Also look for Sabrina Halvorson on Facebook, and be sure to subscribe to our podcast by searching for AgNet West on your podcast app. Thank you for listening to the AgNet News Hour from AgNet West. AgNet West Radio Network, your primary choice for agriculture news.